During Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter's father-in-law threw red wine in her face. The dark liquid dripped from her chin onto the white dress I had bought her, staining the fabric like fresh blood. Across the table, the man held the empty glass like a weapon, his face twisted in arrogance. I waited for my son-in-law to stand up to defend his wife. I waited for him to shout. Instead, he laughed. He leaned back in his chair, swirled his own drink, and said, "Thanks, Dad. Maybe that will finally teach her some respect." I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. My hands gripped the edge of the mahogany table so hard, my knuckles turned white. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply stood up, walked out to the porch, and made one phone call. They looked at me like I was just a senile old man in a flannel shirt and worn-out boots. They had no idea I owned the bank that held their mortgage. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Before I tell you how I destroyed their entire world in 24 hours, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your family from people who did not know your true worth. My name is Harlan Ford, and for 40 years, I built a logistics empire that moved freight across every highway in the southern United States. I started with one rusted truck and ended up with a fleet that could circle the globe. But nobody at that dinner table knew that. When my wife Martha passed away 3 years ago, I made a promise to live simply. I sold the big estate, stepped down as CEO, and moved into a small rental apartment. I drive a 10-year-old Ford pickup truck, and I wear clothes from the thrift store because I am tired of people only liking me for my money. I wanted to see who would stick around for Harlan the man, not Harlan the wallet. That Thanksgiving started like a bad joke. My son-in-law Braden lives in a sprawling mansion in a gated community. It is a beautiful house with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Braden likes to tell everyone he is a self-made investor, but the truth is I secretly funneled $5 million to my daughter Emily as a wedding gift disguised as an insurance payout from her late mother. That money bought this house. That money bought the food we were eating. But Braden and his father Richard acted like they were kings holding court, and I was the jester. The dining room smelled of roasted turkey and expensive cologne. The air was thick and hot. Richard Sterling sat at the head of the table. He is a man who wears three-piece suits to family dinners and talks louder than anyone else in the room. He claims to be a real estate mogul, but I have been in business long enough to know the smell of desperation. And Richard smelled desperate. He spent the first hour of dinner bragging about his new development project in Florida. He talked about millions of dollars as if they were pennies, all while looking down his nose at me. At one point, he pointed his fork at my chest and said, "Harlan, you should really upgrade that truck of yours. It is an eyesore in the driveway. The neighbors might think the gardener is eating with us." Braden chuckled nervously, sipping his wine. "Yeah, Dad, it is embarrassing. We have an image to uphold in this neighborhood. I just cut my turkey and chewed slowly. I told them the truck runs fine. It gets me from point A to point B. That is all a man needs." Richard rolled his eyes. "That is the problem with your generation, Harlan. No ambition, no vision. You are content with crumbs while men like me and Braden are out here hunting the whole buffalo." I wanted to tell him that I had hunted the buffalo, skinned it, and sold the hide before he was even born. But I stayed silent. I looked at my daughter Emily. She looked tired. She is a school teacher, a gentle soul who sees the best in everyone. Too gentle sometimes. She was pushing her food around her plate, her eyes darting nervously between her husband and her father-in-law. She looked like a trapped animal. The tension shifted when the main course was cleared. Richard did not wait for dessert. He reached under his chair and pulled out a leather folder. He slammed it onto the table, rattling the fine china. "Braden, tell her," Richard barked. Braden cleared his throat, avoiding Emily's eyes. "Babe, we have an opportunity. A once-in-a-lifetime deal. Dad's project in Florida needs a little bridge capital. Just a formality, really." Emily shrank in her chair. "Braden, we talked about this. You promised no more risky investments. We don't have the liquidity right now." Richard poured himself another glass of wine, filling it to the brim. "Liquidity is for poor people, Emily. This is about leverage. We need your signature on this loan guarantee. It uses the equity of this house as collateral. Just sign the damn paper." He slid the document across the table. It stopped right next to her wine glass. I saw Emily's hand tremble. I saw her look at me for a split second, begging for help, but then she looked at Braden. Braden leaned in. "Just sign it, Em. Don't be stupid. Do you want me to look like a failure to my father?" I could not stay silent anymore. I put my fork down. The sound of metal hitting china echoed in the room. I asked quietly. Is it wise to leverage your primary residence for a commercial loan, Richard? Interest rates are high right now. Richard turned his head slowly to look at me. His eyes were glazed and red. Excuse me, he sneered. Who asked the truck driver for financial advice? Stick to changing oil filters, Harlan. The adults are talking business. Emily sat up straighter. Don't talk to my father like that. And I am not signing it. I worked too hard to keep this house safe. I am not risking our home for another one of your schemes. The room went dead silent. Braden looked at his father, terrified. Richard's face turned a deep shade of purple. He stood up slowly. He looked massive, looming over my daughter. You ungrateful little brat, he hissed. My son pulled you out of mediocrity. He gave you this life. You do what you are told. I am not signing. Emily said, her voice shaking, but firm. That was when it happened. Richard's hand snapped forward. The motion was so fast and violent. The wine glass didn't just tip over. He threw the contents. A wave of dark red Cabernet crashed into Emily's face. It splashed into her eyes. It soaked her hair. It ran down her neck, ruining the white dress she had worn specifically because Braden said he liked it. She gasped, blinded and shocked. The red liquid looked horrifiedly like blood on her pale skin. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. I looked at Braden. This was his wife, the mother of his future children. This was the moment a man stands up and defends his family. But Braden sat there. He looked at his father, then at his crying wife, and then a smirk crawled across his face. He let out a short, cruel laugh. Thanks, Dad. Maybe that will teach her some respect. She has been getting too mouthy lately. Something inside me snapped. Not a loud snap like a branch breaking, but a quiet, deep fracture like a foundation shifting underground. The Harlan Ford who drove a beat-up truck vanished. The Harlan Ford who negotiated billion-dollar mergers and crushed competitors without mercy woke up. I looked at Richard. He was smiling, wiping a drop of wine from his hand with a napkin. Sit down, old man, he said to me, seeing me rise. Before you have a heart attack. The food is on me anyway. I did not look at him. I looked at Emily. She was wiping wine from her eyes with the tablecloth, sobbing quietly. I walked over to her. I took the napkin from my lap and gently dabbed her cheek. Let's go, Emily, I said softly. She looked up at me, confused and scared. Dad, I can't leave. Braden will be furious. Braden stood up, blocking the doorway. His face was flushed with wine and false power. She is not going anywhere, Harlan. And neither are you until she signs that paper. Or what? Are you going to fight me, old man? I looked at Braden. I looked at his soft hands that had never done a day of hard labor. I looked at his expensive watch bought with my daughter's money. I am not going to fight you, Braden, I said. My voice was low, steady. It was the voice I used before I fired an entire executive board. I am going to leave, and Emily is coming with me. If you touch her, I will not call the police. I will handle it myself. There was something in my eyes that made him hesitate. He stepped back just an inch. That was enough. I guided Emily toward the door. She was still crying, still shaking. As we reached the foyer, Richard shouted from the dining room, "Go ahead, run away, but don't come crawling back when we are billionaires and take your trashy father with you." I walked Emily out to my old Ford pickup. The night air was cold. I opened the passenger door for her and helped her inside. She curled up in the seat, ruining her dress further, but she didn't care. I walked around to the driver's side, but I did not get in immediately. I stood there in the dark driveway of the house I had paid for. I looked at the golden light spilling from the dining room window. I could see them inside pouring more wine, laughing. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought they had put the woman and the old man in their place. I reached into the pocket of my flannel shirt and pulled out a phone. It was not the cheap smartphone I used for family calls. It was a satellite phone, heavy and encrypted. I flipped it open and dialed a number I had not used in 3 years. It rang once. "Yes, sir," a voice answered instantly. It was Frank Kowalski, my chief legal counsel and the only man who knew where all the bodies were buried. "Frank," I said, "I am sorry to wake you." "You didn't wake me, sir. What do you need?" I looked at the window again. I saw Braden raise a glass to his father. "I need you to activate protocol number 4, I said. There was a pause on the line. Frank knew what that meant. That was the nuclear option, the scorched earth protocol. "Sir, are you sure? That involves freezing assets, forensics, calling in favors from the governor's office. I am sure," I said. "I want a full audit on Richard Sterling and Braden Sterling. I want to know who they owe money to. I want to know where every cent comes from. And Frank, I want it done by breakfast. Consider it done. I hung up the phone. I took one last look at the mansion. They had 12 hours. 12 hours until the sun came up and their world turned to ash. I got into the truck, started the engine, and drove my daughter away from the monsters. They had made a fatal mistake. They judged the book by its cover, and they were about to find out that this book was written in blood. The suspension of my 1998 Ford F-150 creaked as we hit a pothole on the interstate, but the old truck held steady. That was the thing about this truck and about me. We were both older than we looked, and we were both built to carry heavy loads without breaking down. Beside me in the passenger seat, Emily had finally stopped shaking, but the silence in the cab was heavy. The streetlights flickered rhythmically across her face, illuminating the dark red stain on her dress every few seconds. It looked like a wound that refused to heal. I kept my eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel. My hands are rough now. The skin is calloused from splitting firewood and changing my own oil. If you looked at these hands today, you would see a gardener or a mechanic. You would never guess that these same fingers used to sign acquisition contracts for shipping lanes in the Panama Canal. You would never guess that this right hand had shaken presidents and negotiated trade deals that kept half the grocery stores in the South stocked with fresh produce. I looked at my knuckles, scarred and weathered, and I thought about Martha, my beautiful Martha. When she passed 3 years ago, she made me promise to stop. She told me, Harlan, you have spent 40 years building an empire, but you missed the sunsets. She wanted me to rest. She wanted me to find peace in the quiet moments. So I did. I buried the CEO and became just Harlan, the old man who lives in apartment 4B. I thought living simply would protect me from the vipers of the world. I thought if I had nothing, nobody would try to take anything from me. I was wrong. I had forgotten that some men do not need a reason to be cruel. They only need an opportunity. We pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex. It is a brick building on the edge of town where the rent is cheap and the neighbors keep to themselves. It is not dangerous, but it is certainly not the gated community Emily drove away from. I helped her out of the truck. She winced as her heels touched the cracked pavement. Come on, honey, I said, guiding her toward the stairs. Let's get you cleaned up. Inside my apartment, the air smelled of lemon polish and old books. It is a small space. Just a living room, a kitchenette, and 2 bedrooms. The furniture is second-hand but sturdy. I sat Emily down on the beige sofa and went to the kitchen to boil water for tea. My movements were automatic, but my mind was racing, calculating probabilities and leverage just like I used to do in the boardroom. Dad. Emily's voice was small. She sounded like she was 6 years old again, asking for a glass of water after a nightmare. Dad, maybe we should go back. I stopped with the kettle in my hand. I turned around slowly. Go back where Emily, to the house. Braden is going to be so worried. He didn't mean it, Dad. You know how he gets when he drinks red wine. It just makes him aggressive, but he loves me. He is just under so much pressure with his dad's business. I shouldn't have provoked him. I set the kettle down on the counter with a soft thud. I walked over to the sofa and sat on the coffee table facing her. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. This was the woman who graduated with honors, who used to debate me on politics until midnight, who ran a classroom of 30 unruly teenagers with grace. And now she was sitting here blaming herself because a man assaulted her. That is not love, Emily, I said gently. That is control. And he didn't spill the wine. He threw it. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She picked at a loose thread on the sofa cushion. He is stressed about the loan, Dad. Richard says if they don't get the capital, the deal in Florida will fall through. Braden says I am being selfish, holding on to the equity in the house. Maybe I am. Maybe I should just sign it. It is my duty as a wife, right? I felt a physical pain in my chest, sharper than any heart attack. They had broken her. Piece by piece over the last 5 years, they had dismantled her confidence until she believed up was down and abuse was affection. This is what they call gaslighting. They twist your reality until you are thanking them for hurting you. I took her hands in mine. Her fingers were ice cold. Listen to me very clearly. You are not selfish. You are smart. That house is the only thing standing between you and ruin. Braden does not need capital. He needs a miracle. And you are not going to be his sacrifice. She started to cry again, soft, broken sobs. I don't know what to do, Dad. He said if I leave, he will take everything. He said I am too boring and old and that no one else would want me. I pulled her into a hug, letting her cry into my flannel shirt. I held her until her breathing slowed, until the exhaustion of the night finally caught up with her. I led her to the spare bedroom. It used to be my office, but I put a bed in there for when the grandkids visited, not that Braden ever let them come over. "Get some sleep, honey," I told her, pulling the quilt up to her chin. "We will figure this out in the morning." I waited by the door until her breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. Then I closed the door softly. The silence in the apartment was heavy, but it was the silence before a storm. I walked out onto the small balcony that overlooked the parking lot. The night air was crisp and smelled of rain. I could see the city lights in the distance shimmering like diamonds. Somewhere out there in that glowing grid, Braden and Richard were probably laughing, drinking more of my daughter's wine, thinking they had won. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old man who drove a truck. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the satellite phone again. I dialed Frank Kowalski. He answered on the first ring, just like before. "I am listening, Sir," Frank said. "Sir." I leaned against the railing, looking down at my truck. "Frank, they made a mistake. A fatal mistake." "I assume you don't mean the wine, sir." "No, Frank. The wine was just the symptom. The disease is much deeper. I listened to them tonight. I watched their eyes. Richard isn't investing in Florida. I know a man who is cornered when I see one. He was sweating, Frank. He was sweating while eating a $200 turkey. And Braden, he looked at that loan document like it was a life raft. So what are your instructions, sir?" I took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs. I felt the old Harlan Ford coming back. The man who could freeze a competitor's supply chain with a single signature. "Activate winter protocol," I said. My voice was low, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "Winter protocol." Sir Frank's voice hesitated for a fraction of a second. "That is total asset freeze. That is aggressive forensic accounting. We haven't used that since the hostile takeover in '99. I know what it is, Frank. I wrote the protocol. I want you to tear their financial lives apart. I want to know every penny they owe to anyone within the next 24 hours. I want to know who holds their debt. I want to know which banks they use. I want to know if they have paid their taxes. I want to know if they have paid their parking tickets." "Understood, sir. I will have the team on it immediately." "And Frank." "Yes, sir. Find out who Richard owes money to outside of the banks. Men like him always have shadow debt. If he is desperate enough to extort his daughter-in-law at Thanksgiving dinner, he is in deep with someone dangerous. Find out who it is, because I am going to buy that debt. You are going to buy his debt, sir." I looked up at the moon hanging pale and cold in the sky. "Yes. By tomorrow night, I want to own Richard Sterling. I want to own the shirt on his back and the air in his lungs. Do it." I hung up the phone and stood there for a long time. My hands were steady now. The trembling was gone. They wanted to play games with my family. They wanted to talk about power and ambition. Fine. I would show them what real power looked like. I would show them that the winter was coming, and I was the one bringing the storm. The morning sun hit the cracked linoleum of my kitchen floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny suspended lies. I sat at the small formica table, nursing a mug of black coffee that tasted like mud compared to the artisanal blends my daughter was used to drinking. Across from me, Emily sat huddled in one of my oversized flannel shirts, her phone clutched in her hand as if it were a lifeline. It had been buzzing incessantly since 6 in the morning. I watched her face transform. The fear from the night before was fading, replaced by a confusion that broke my heart. This is how the poison works. It does not kill you instantly. It paralyzes your instincts first. It makes you doubt your own eyes. "Answer it," I said softly. "Put it on speaker." She looked at me, her eyes wide and red-rimmed. "Dad, I don't want to fight with him." "You won't have to fight him, honey. Just listen. Listen to what he says, not how he says it." She swiped the screen and set the phone on the table. Braden's voice filled the small kitchen. It was smooth, practiced the voice of a man who could sell sand to a nomad. "Babe, finally. I have been worried sick. Where are you? Please tell me you are not still at your dad's place." "I am here, Braden," Emily whispered. A heavy sigh came through the speaker. "Look, I am sorry about last night, okay? It got out of hand. But you have to understand Dad is under a lot of pressure with this merger." He didn't throw the wine, Emily. He was gesturing and the glass slipped. It was an accident. You know he has that carpal tunnel in his wrist. I took a sip of my coffee to keep from spitting it out. Carpal tunnel, ARPL. The man played golf 3 times a week, and honestly, Braden continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Your dad really blew it out of proportion. I mean, dragging you out of there like that. It was embarrassing, Em. He is getting old. I think he is starting to lose his grip on reality a bit. He was acting paranoid, senile almost. He is not senile. Emily defended me, but her voice lacked conviction. He lives in a shack, Emily. He drives a truck that belongs in a junkyard. He doesn't understand our world. He doesn't understand high finance or the stress of closing a multi-million-dollar deal. He sees danger where there is only opportunity. He is just a scared old man, and he is making you scared too. I sat there stone-faced. I let the insults wash over me. I needed Emily to hear this. I needed her to hear him dismiss her trauma as a clerical error. Come home, babe, Braden said. Dad is willing to overlook the disrespect. He loves you. He just wants us to secure our future. This deal in Florida, it is the golden ticket. If we miss the filing deadline because you are sulking at your dad's apartment, we are going to lose everything. Do you want to be the wife of a billionaire, or do you want to be counting coupons like your father? Emily looked at me. I saw the wavering in her eyes. I saw the desperate need to believe him. It is easier to believe your husband is stressed than to accept he is a monster. It is easier to believe your father is old and confused than to face the reality that you married a predator. I will come home, Emily said softly. Great. Hurry. We need to get that paperwork signed by noon to make the wire transfer deadline. I love you, babe. Drive safe. The line went dead. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Emily stood up and started gathering her things. She avoided my gaze. I have to go, Dad, she said. He is right. I overreacted. Richard wouldn't hurt me intentionally. And Braden, he is just trying to build us a future. I stood up slowly. My knees cracked. I did not block her path. I did not shout. If I forbade her from going, she would run to him just to prove her independence. That is how the trap works. They isolate you by making your protectors look like the controlling ones. Emily, I said, walking her to the door. You are a grown woman. You make your own choices. I know you don't like him, Dad. It is not about liking him. It is about the math, and the math doesn't add up. But listen to me. I reached out and held her shoulders, looking deep into her eyes. Go back if you must, but promise me one thing. What? Do not sign anything today. Tell them you need 48 hours to review the documents with a lawyer. Tell them you have a migraine. Tell them you lost your pen. I don't care what you tell them. Just buy yourself 48 hours. Dad, the deadline. There is no deadline, Emily. Real deals don't expire in an afternoon. Scams do. Panic does. If the deal is real, it will still be there on Wednesday. She hesitated. I saw the gears turning in her mind. The seed of doubt I had planted was small, but it was there. Okay, she said finally. 48 hours. I promise. But you have to trust me, Dad. I can handle this. I trust you. I lied. I trusted her heart, but I did not trust her judgment, not while she was under their spell. I watched her walk down the stairs to her car. She looked small and fragile in the morning light. As soon as her taillights disappeared around the corner, I moved. I went to my bedroom and opened the locked chest at the foot of my bed. I took out a baseball cap, a pair of nondescript sunglasses, and a different set of keys. I left the apartment, locking the deadbolt behind me. I did not take my truck. The Ford was too conspicuous now. Richard had made fun of it, which meant he noticed it. I walked 2 blocks over to a rental garage I kept under a pseudonym. Inside sat a gray sedan, boring and invisible, the kind of car you see 100 times a day and never remember. I slid into the driver's seat and checked my watch. Emily had a 5-minute head start. I knew the route she would take. She would drive slow, rehearsing what she would say. I pulled out into traffic, keeping a safe distance. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Frank Kowalski. Forensic audit initiated. Initial findings are disturbing. You were right about the debt. It is not just banks. I found a link to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. And Harlan, the name on the shell company connects to the cartel. I gripped the steering wheel. Cartel. So Richard was not just a fraud, he was a dead man walking, and he was trying to use my daughter's inheritance to buy his own life back. I followed Emily's car as she turned into the gated community. I parked the sedan down the street where I had a clear view of the Sterling mansion but remained hidden by the landscaping trucks servicing the neighbors. I watched her walk up the driveway. The front door opened before she even knocked. Braden was there. He pulled her into a hug that looked more like a restraint than an embrace. He kissed her forehead, but his eyes were scanning the street, looking for me, looking for the old man in the truck. He didn't see me. He didn't see the gray sedan. He didn't see the wolf waiting in the tall grass. They went inside, and the heavy oak door slammed shut. I felt a surge of nausea. She was back in the lion's den, but this time she wasn't alone. I tapped the steering wheel, waiting for the next update from Frank. 48 hours, that was all I needed to tighten the noose. If they touched her, if they so much as raised a voice, I would burn their world down before lunch. I settled into the seat, watching the house, watching for shadows in the windows, waiting for my turn to move. The game had changed. They were playing for money. I was playing for blood. I sat in the back booth of the Rusty Spoon, a 24-hour diner on the industrial side of town where the coffee tasted like battery acid, and the waitress called everyone sugar without looking them in the eye. It was the kind of place where men in work boots ate silence along with their eggs, and nobody asked why an old man was staring at the door like a hawk. I fit right in. My flannel shirt was faded, and my hands were wrapped around a mug that had lost its heat 20 minutes ago. At exactly 9 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed. Frank Kowalski walked in. He had traded his usual three-piece Italian silk suit for a nondescript windbreaker and a navy baseball cap pulled low. To anyone else, he looked like a retired cop or a long-haul trucker on a layover. To me, he looked like the only weapon I had left. He slid into the booth opposite me without a word, placing a battered laptop bag on the cracked vinyl seat. Frank did not order coffee. He did not ask how I was sleeping. He simply unzipped the bag and spun a laptop around so I could see the screen. The glow of the monitor illuminated his face, revealing the deep lines of a man who had pulled an all-nighter. "It is worse than we thought," Harlan Frank said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator unit behind the counter. I dug deep. I bypassed their public filings and went straight into the back end of their transaction history. I had to call in a favor from a contact at the Treasury Department to decrypt some of these wire transfers. I leaned in, squinting at the spreadsheets. Rows and rows of numbers, most of them in red. I know how to read a balance sheet. I have read thousands of them. But this was not a balance sheet. This was an autopsy report. "The Sterling Group is not a development firm," Frank continued, pointing a thick finger at a column of negative numbers. "It is a ghost ship. They have no assets, Harlan. No land in Florida, no commercial permits in Texas. The high-rise project they bragged about last Christmas, it does not exist. They never even bought the land." I looked up at him. "So where is the money coming from? They drive Porsches. They eat caviar. Braden bought a $50,000 watch last month." Frank tapped the screen. "It is a Ponzi scheme, Harlan. A classic textbook Ponzi. They take money from new investors promising 20% returns and use it to pay off the dividends for the old investors. They skim the cream off the top to fund their lifestyle. But the well has run dry. Recruitment has slowed down. They haven't brought in a new whale in 6 months. I felt a cold anger settling in my gut. They were not just bad businessmen, they were thieves. They were stealing from retirees and doctors and teachers, selling them dreams made of smoke. "But that is not the worst part," Frank said, and for the first time I saw a flicker of genuine concern in his eyes. "Being broke is a civil matter. Being dead is a different problem entirely. Scroll down." I touched the trackpad and scrolled to the bottom of the document. There was a separate tab highlighted in black. The numbers there were not large compared to the bank loans, but the names attached to them made my blood run cold. "They owe $12 million to regional banks," Frank explained. "That is standard corporate debt. The banks will sue them, seize their cars, and ruin their credit score. But this $5 million right here." He pointed to a line item labeled simply, "Consulting fees." "This is not a bank. This is shadow money." I looked at the routing numbers. They bounced through 3 shell companies before landing in an account in the Cayman Islands. I recognized the structure. I had seen it before when I was cleaning up the shipping lanes in the 90s. "Who is it?" I asked. Frank lowered his voice. "It traces back to a private lending syndicate out of Miami. They are not the kind of people who send demand letters, Harlan. They are the kind of people who send men with baseball bats and blowtorches. This isn't investment capital. This is loan sharking on a corporate scale. Richard Sterling borrowed $5 million at 40% interest to plug the holes in his Ponzi scheme, hoping he could land one big deal to pay it back. He failed. And the deadline I asked already knowing the answer. Tuesday," Frank said grimly. "The balloon payment is due next Tuesday. $5 million plus interest. If they don't pay, the lenders will assume they are non-compliant. These people view non-compliance as an insult. They will come for assets first, and if there are no assets, they will come for blood. I sat back against the vinyl booth, letting the information sink in. It all made sense now. The sweat on Richard's forehead, the aggression, the desperation in Braden's voice when he called Emily. They were not just trying to close a deal. They were trying to save their lives. They were cornered rats, and they needed a piece of cheese to distract the cats waiting outside the door. "And that is where Emily comes in," I said quietly. Frank nodded. "The house. It is the only clean asset left in their entire orbit. The banks have liens on their office building, their cars, and Richard's condo. But the house Braden lives in, the house you bought for them, is in Emily's name alone thanks to that trust structure we set up. It has $2 million in equity. They want her to sign it over so they can mortgage it, I realized. $2 million. It won't pay off the debt, Frank corrected me. But $2 million cash is enough to pay the VIG, the interest payment. It buys them another 30 days of breathing room. It keeps the wolves away for 1 more month. They are willing to make your daughter homeless just to buy themselves 4 more weeks of pretending to be rich." I looked out the window of the diner. A stray dog was digging through the dumpster in the alley. I felt a kinship with that dog. We were both looking at garbage and trying to find something worth saving. "If she signs that paper," I said, thinking aloud, "she loses the house. When the house gets foreclosed on, and it will, because they can't make the payments, she is on the street. And since the loan is guaranteed by the property, the shadow lenders will have a claim on it. They could literally show up at her front door to collect." "Exactly," Frank said, closing the laptop. "They are not just stealing her money, Harlan. They are inviting danger into her living room. If they default on a loan secured by that house, the people coming to collect won't care that Emily didn't know what she was signing. They will just see an asset they can liquidate." I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. My daughter was living in a house of cards that was already on fire, and her husband was trying to lock the door from the outside. They viewed her as a resource, a signature, a piggy bank to be smashed open when the bill came due. "What is the next move?" Sir Frank asked, reaching for his water glass. "Do we go to the police? The FBI would love this Ponzi scheme." "No," I said instantly. "If we go to the feds, they freeze everything. The investigation takes months. Richard and Braden might get arrested eventually, but in the meantime, the shadow lenders will see the assets being frozen, and they will panic. They might decide to cut their losses and hurt someone before the police can build a case. And Emily, she would be dragged into the middle of it. She would be the wife of a felon. Her assets would be tied up in litigation for years. I need to get her out cleanly first. So what do we do?" I looked at the red numbers burning in my mind. 12 million to the banks, 5 million to the sharks, $17 million of hole they had dug for themselves. "We accelerate the timeline," I said. "We don't wait for Tuesday. If they need money so badly, I am going to give them a chance to earn it, but they are going to have to work for it." Frank raised an eyebrow. "You are going to give them money." "No," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "I am going to buy their debt. I want you to contact the regional banks holding that 12 million. Use the shell company, the one we used for the acquisitions in 08. Tell them we are an aggressive debt collection agency looking to buy distressed assets. Offer them 50 cents on the dollar. They will jump at the chance to get toxic loans off their books. You want to become their primary creditor?" Frank asked, understanding dawning on his face. "I want to own the paper, Frank. I want to be the one holding the leash. By Monday morning, I want to be the reason their credit cards stop working. I want to be the reason their office doors are padlocked. I want to squeeze them until they have no choice but to show Emily exactly who they are. And the shadow debt. The 5 million. Leave that to me," I said. "I know how to handle bullies. If they think they are predators, they are about to find out there is a much bigger dinosaur in the jungle." Frank packed up the laptop. His movements were crisp, professional. He stood up and adjusted his cap. "I will get the paperwork started. The banks will close by 5. We can own their debt by Monday opening bell." "Good," I said. "Go." Frank walked out of the diner, disappearing into the gray morning. I stayed in the booth for a moment longer, staring at the cold coffee. My daughter was in a house with 2 men who would sell her to save their own skins. They were desperate, dangerous, and out of time, but they had made one critical error calculation. They thought they needed $2 million to survive. What they really needed was mercy, and I had just run out of it. I dropped a $20 bill on the table and stood up. My joints popped. I felt the weight of my 72 years, but I also felt a surge of energy I hadn't felt since I retired. I wasn't just a father anymore, I was the chairman again, and the board meeting was about to begin. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum, heavy with rain that refused to fall. I sat in the driver's seat of the rental sedan parked 3 rows back from the entrance of the First National Bank. It was a local branch, the kind with red brick walls and a flag that needed replacing fluttering limply on the pole. I had been waiting for 20 minutes sipping lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup when I saw the silver Porsche swerve into the lot. Braden drove like he lived fast and reckless. He took up 2 parking spaces, leaving the car at a crooked angle. I watched him get out. He adjusted his suit jacket and smoothed back his hair, checking his reflection in the side mirror. From a distance, he looked like success. Up close through the lens of my binoculars, I saw the fraying reality. His shirt was wrinkled at the collar. He hadn't shaved properly. He looked like a man who had spent the weekend staring at a wall, wondering when the roof was going to cave in. He was carrying a leather portfolio under his arm. I knew exactly what was inside. Desperation. I waited until he walked through the glass double doors before I exited my vehicle. I pulled my baseball cap lower and hunched my shoulders, adopting the posture of a man whose biggest worry was the price of heart medication. I walked slowly, leaning on a cane I didn't need, shuffling into the bank lobby. The air inside was cool and smelled of sanitized money. It was quiet. A few tellers stood behind the counter counting bills with rhythmic snaps. A security guard, bored out of his mind, leaned against a pillar, scrolling on his phone. I moved to the seating area near the customer service desks, picking up a discarded newspaper from a coffee table. I held it up, obscuring my face, leaving just enough of a gap to watch the drama unfold. Braden did not go to the teller line. He marched straight to the desk of the branch manager. The manager was a man named Bill Henderson. Bill was 50 years old, balding, and wore glasses that were too big for his face. He looked like a mild-mannered accountant, but I knew better. Bill had been my lead payroll officer at Ford Logistics for 15 years before he retired to run this quiet little branch. He was loyal to the bone, and he knew exactly who I was, even if I looked like a drifter today. I watched Braden sit down without being invited. He flashed a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. I could hear his voice carrying across the silent lobby. "Good morning," Bill Braden said, loud enough for the tellers to hear. "I need to make a withdrawal from my wife's trust, the Emily Ford Sterling account. We have an investment opportunity that is closing at noon, and I need a cashier's check for $250,000. I lowered the paper slightly. $250,000. He wasn't trying to pay off the sharks yet. He was trying to get walking around money. He was trying to secure a getaway fund or maybe pay off the lease on that Porsche before they repossessed it. Bill Henderson looked at Braden over the rim of his glasses. He didn't smile. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling. Is your wife with you today?" Braden laughed a short, nervous bark. "Oh, you know Emily. She is under the weather. A migraine. She asked me to handle this for her so she wouldn't have to come out in the damp air. I have the authorization right here." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a power of attorney document. Even from 20 feet away, I could see the stamp of a notary. I knew for a fact Emily had not signed that. She had been at my apartment all weekend crying over cups of tea. That signature was a forgery, and a bad one at that. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I kept my eyes on Braden, but my thumb moved over the keypad. I typed a simple message to Bill. "He is lying. Deny it. Record everything." I hit send. I saw Bill's phone light up on his desk. He glanced at it for a fraction of a second, then looked back at Braden. He picked up the document and studied it. The silence stretched out. Braden began to tap his foot on the carpet, a rapid staccato rhythm of anxiety. "Is there a problem?" Bill Braden asked, his voice tightening. Bill set the paper down. He folded his hands on the desk. "Mr. Sterling, this power of attorney is dated yesterday." "That is right," Braden said. "We had a notary come to the house. Sunday service. Cost me a fortune." "I see," Bill said calmly. "The problem is, Mr. Sterling, that the Emily Ford Trust is a protected asset. It requires dual authentication for any withdrawal over $10,000. That means Mrs. Sterling needs to be physically present to provide a thumbprint, or she needs to call on a secure line with her verbal password." Braden's smile vanished. "Since when?" "I have made transfers before without dragging her down here." "Since this morning," Bill said. "Bank policy was updated. Security protocols." Braden leaned forward. Listen to me, Bill. I don't have time for bureaucracy. I have partners waiting. This is my wife's money. Whatever belongs to her belongs to me. That is how marriage works. Now cut the check. I am afraid I cannot do that, Sir Bill said. Not without Emily. Braden stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. The tellers stopped counting. The security guard looked up from his phone. Do you know who I am? Braden shouted. His face was flushing red, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar. I am Braden Sterling. My father is Richard Sterling. We own half this town. I am not some beggar off the street asking for a loan. I am demanding access to my own capital. I slid my phone partly out of my pocket, pressing the record button on the voice memo app. The microphone picked up every word echoing off the high ceilings. I understand your frustration, Bill said, his voice remaining professionally flat. But the answer is no. And frankly, Mr. Sterling, this signature does not match the specimen we have on file for your wife. If you press this, I will have to flag it for fraud review. That was the spark. Braden exploded. He slammed his fist onto the mahogany desk, making the pen holder jump. Fraud, he screamed. You are accusing me of fraud, you little bean counter. I will bury you. I will buy this trashy little bank and I will fire you myself. I will turn this building into a parking lot. Do you hear me? Give me my money. The security guard took a step forward, his hand resting on his belt. Braden spun around, pointing a finger at the guard. Don't you dare come near me. You are all incompetent. I am going to call my lawyers. You are going to regret this. You are going to be begging me for a job next week. He grabbed the forged document off the desk, crumpling it in his fist. He looked wild, unhinged. This was the real Braden, the man who threw wine at women, the man who thought the world owed him a living because he wore a suit. I watched him storm toward the exit. He walked right past me. He was so consumed by his own rage, so blinded by his entitlement, that he didn't even look at the old man in the flannel shirt sitting 3 feet away. He pushed through the doors into the humid morning air. I stayed seated for a moment longer. The silence returned to the bank, but the tension remained. Bill Henderson looked across the lobby at me. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. I nodded back. I stopped the recording on my phone. 1 minute and 45 seconds of threats, intimidation, and attempted grand larceny. It was beautiful. It was the kind of evidence that family court judges loved. It was the kind of evidence that turned a divorce hearing from a negotiation into an execution. I stood up, leaning on my cane, waiting for my heart rate to slow. I wasn't scared. I was disgusted. I had worked with sharks and killers in the logistics business, men who would slit your throat for a shipping container, but even they had a code. Braden had no code. He was just a child throwing a tantrum because the cookie jar was locked. I walked out of the bank. The silver Porsche was gone, leaving skid marks on the asphalt. I walked to my rental car, feeling the weight of the phone in my pocket. Braden thought he had a bad morning. He thought he had hit a wall. He didn't know that the wall was just the beginning. I started the car and checked the time. It was 11:30. The banks were holding the line. Now it was time for the second phase. I needed to see what Frank had found on the other side of town. Braden had failed to get the walking around money. That meant the desperation would double. And desperate men make mistakes. I pulled out of the lot, my eyes on the road, my mind on the hunt. The trap was set, and the rat was running right toward the cheese. I met Frank Kowalski an hour later in the deserted parking lot of an old shopping mall on the west side of town. The rain had finally started to fall, tapping a relentless rhythm against the roof of my rental sedan. It was the kind of gray, miserable weather that matched the feeling in my gut. Frank parked his black SUV next to me and climbed into my passenger seat. He brought the smell of wet pavement and stale tobacco with him. He didn't look at me. He just placed a thick manila envelope on the dashboard between us. I stared at the envelope. In my line of work, envelopes like that never contained birthday cards. They contained subpoenas, indictments, or evidence of breach of contract. But I knew this was different. This was not business. This was the dissection of my daughter's life. You were right, Sir Frank said, his voice heavy. He paused, rubbing his face with a tired hand. I wish you hadn't been. I really wish you had been wrong about this one. I picked up the envelope. My hands were steady, but my heart felt like a stone dropping through water. I undid the clasp and slid the contents out. Photographs, dozens of them. High-resolution glossy prints taken with a telephoto lens. I shuffled through them, slowly forcing myself to look at every detail. The first photo showed Braden. He was smiling. It was a genuine smile, not the shark-like grin he used at business dinners. He was standing outside a boutique in the trendy uptown district, holding the door open for a woman. She was young, maybe 25. She had long blonde hair and was wearing a dress that cost more than my truck. She looked like a model or an influencer, the kind of woman who exists on Instagram and in the nightmares of wives. Her name, Frank told me, was Tiffany. I flipped to the next photo. Braden and Tiffany sitting at a sidewalk cafe. He was holding her hand across the table. He was leaning in, whispering something that made her laugh. I looked at the timestamp in the corner of the photo. It was taken 2 days after Patrice's funeral. While my daughter was at home mourning her mother while I was sitting alone in my dark house trying to figure out how to live without my wife, Braden was drinking mimosas with his mistress. I felt a bile rise in my throat. I swallowed it down. I kept looking. The next series of photos showed them entering a high-rise apartment building downtown. The Meridian. I knew it well. It was one of the most expensive addresses in the city. Concierge service, rooftop pool, private elevators. Frank handed me a sheet of paper. It was a copy of a lease agreement. Penthouse B. Frank said quietly, $6,500 a month, plus utilities and parking. I looked at the signature on the lease. It was Braden's scrawl. But then I looked at the payment method. My vision blurred. I had to blink to clear it. The checks for the rent, the checks for the deposit, the checks for the furniture rental. They were all drawn from the Emily Ford Trust. He is paying for her apartment with my daughter's money, I said. The words tasted like ash. Frank nodded grimly. He set up a recurring transfer 6 months ago. He listed it in the books as office overhead for a satellite location. Emily never checks the line items. She trusts him. He is using the money you gave her to keep a roof over his girlfriend's head while he tries to mortgage the roof over your daughter's head. I looked back at the photo of Tiffany. She wasn't the enemy. She was just a symptom. A symptom of a man who had no soul. Braden wasn't just a bad husband. He was a parasite. He was feeding off Emily's inheritance, feeding off her love and using it to build a secret life where he was the big man, the provider, the hero. I put the photos back in the envelope. My hands were shaking now just a little. It wasn't fear, it was the vibration of a machine that was revving up to maximum power. I wanted to drive to that penthouse. I wanted to drag him out by his expensive haircut and throw him off the balcony. I wanted to break him bone by bone. But that was the old Harlan talking. The Harlan who fought with his fists in the truck yards back in the 70s. I had to be the CEO. I had to be cold. "Do we give this to Emily?" Frank asked. He reached for the envelope. "If she sees this, she will leave him today. She will file for divorce before dinner. It ends the leverage game immediately." I put my hand on the envelope, stopping him. "No." Frank looked surprised. "Sir, with all due respect, this is the smoking gun. This proves he is not just a failure but a cheater. This destroys his character." I looked out the windshield at the rain streaking the glass. "If I show her this now, Frank, do you know what will happen? She will cry, she will scream, she will confront him. And do you know what Braden will do? He will lie. He will say Tiffany is a client. He will say the apartment is for business meetings. He will say the photos are taken out of context. He will gaslight her again just like he did with the wine. He will tell her I hired a sleazy detective to frame him because I am a jealous old man." "But the lease," Frank argued. "The money trail." "She is in denial, Frank," I said, my voice hard. "Denial is a powerful drug. If I force her to look at this before she is ready, she might hate me for destroying her illusion. She needs to see it with her own eyes. She needs to hear it from his own mouth. She needs to catch him when he thinks he is safe." I thought about the wiretap I had planned. I thought about the party. "We are not going to save him," I said. "We are going to let him save himself right into a grave. We are going to let him think he is winning. We are going to let him think he has fooled everyone. Because when a man thinks he is untouchable, that is when he makes the mistake that hangs him." Frank sat back in his seat. He nodded slowly. "You want to orchestrate the reveal." "I want a total collapse," I said. "I don't want a divorce where they split assets and he walks away with half. I want him destroyed. I want him to lose the money, the reputation, the girl, and the wife all in the same hour. I want him to stand in the rubble of his life and know that it was his own arrogance that lit the fuse." "So what do I do with these?" Frank asked, gesturing to the envelope. "Keep them," I said. "Scan them, back them up. We will use them in court later to ensure he doesn't get a dime of alimony. But for now, they stay buried." I looked at the time. It was early afternoon. Braden had struck out at the bank. Now he would be desperate. He had a mistress to impress, a father to pay off, and a wife he couldn't control. The pressure cooker was building. "He is going to come for me, Frank," I said. He tried the bank. That didn't work. Now he is going to remember the only other asset he thinks he can squeeze. He is going to remember the old man. You think he will come to your apartment. I know he will. And Richard will be with him. They are running out of options. They are going to come to beg or threaten or steal. And I need to be there when they do. I opened the car door, letting the wet air rush in. Keep the pressure on the banks, Frank. Make sure every credit card they have declines by sunset. Make sure their gas cards don't work. Make sure they can't even buy a pack of gum without a decline code. I want them to feel the walls closing in. Consider it done, sir. I stepped out into the rain. I didn't feel the cold. I felt the heat of the fire I was building. I watched Frank drive away, then I got back into my rental car. I drove back to my shabby apartment building. I parked the sedan 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, getting soaked to the bone. I needed to look pathetic. I needed to look beaten. I climbed the stairs to my apartment and unlocked the door. I sat in the dark living room and waited. I looked at the photo of Patrice on the mantel. "I am sorry you have to see this, honey," I whispered to the empty room. "But sometimes you have to burn the field to save the farm." I didn't have to wait long. An hour later, I heard the heavy footsteps on the stairs. I heard the aggressive knock on the door. It wasn't a request for entry, it was a demand. I didn't get up immediately. I let them knock again, louder this time. I let them stew in their own panic. Then I shuffled to the door, stooped my shoulders, and put on the mask of the scared, confused old man. It was time for the next act. And I was going to deliver the performance of a lifetime. They didn't just stand at the door waiting for an invitation. Braden pushed past me into the living room, his shoulders slamming into my chest with enough force to make me stumble. The air shifted from awkward to dangerous in a heartbeat. He looked around the small space with wild, feverish eyes. He wasn't just desperate, he was frantic, like an addict looking for a fix. He started pulling open drawers. He swept my collection of old farmers' almanacs off the shelf, sending them crashing to the floor in a heap of paper and dust. "I know you old-timers," Braden spat, kicking a stack of magazines across the linoleum. "You don't trust banks. You stuff cash in coffee cans. You hide it under the floorboards." "Where is it, Harlan? I need cash now, not tomorrow. I need $5,000 just to keep the lights on at the office. Where is the stash?" Richard stood by the door, blocking the exit. He didn't stop his son. He watched the destruction with cold calculation, his arms crossed over his expensive suit. "Let him look, Harlan." Richard said, his voice devoid of any empathy. "If you have a stash, now is the time to donate to the cause. Consider it a down payment on your daughter's future happiness. If you don't help us, Braden is going to be very unhappy, and unhappy husbands make for miserable wives." My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of holding back the tiger inside me. Braden grabbed a ceramic vase from the side table. It was a cheap thing I bought at a garage sale for $2, but he didn't know that. He looked at me with pure malice and smashed it against the wall. Shards of pottery exploded across the room. "Stop it," I said, my voice trembling with feigned terror. "Please, that is all I have. You are breaking my home." Braden got in my face. He was close enough that I could smell the sour sweat of panic on him masking his cologne. He grabbed the collar of my flannel shirt and bunched it in his fist. He shoved me back hard against the wall. The plaster crumbled behind my shoulders, and a picture frame fell to the floor, shattering the glass. "You are holding out on us," Braden hissed. "You have land. You have a truck. You must have something. Do you know what happens to me if I don't pay the Vigorish by midnight? They are going to come for me, Harlan. And if they come for me, I am going to make sure Emily feels every bit of that pain. I will make her life a living hell. I will make her wish she had never met me." I looked at his fist gripping my shirt. I imagined breaking his wrist. It would be so easy. A simple twist of torque and leverage, a move I learned 40 years ago on the loading docks. I could drop him to his knees in 3 seconds. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had to let him dig the hole deeper. I had to let him incriminate himself fully. The tiny camera hidden in the smoke detector above us was capturing every frame of this assault. "I don't have cash," I wheezed, acting the part of the frail victim, allowing my knees to buckle slightly. "I only have the land. Please let me go." Braden released me with a shove. I slumped against the wall, rubbing my neck. He looked at his father, breathing hard, his chest heaving. "He is useless, Dad. We are wasting time. We need to liquidate the house. We need to forge her signature if she won't give it. We can find a notary who will look the other way for $500. We will not discuss felonies in front of witnesses, Richard snapped sharply. But he looked at me, and I saw the dark intent in his eyes. They were considering it. They were past the point of morality. They were considering crime. That was the moment I knew there was no redemption for them. I had given them a chance to ask for help with dignity. Instead, they chose violence. They chose theft. They chose to assault an old man in his own home. I straightened my shirt slowly. I looked at the broken vase and the shattered picture frame on the floor. "You didn't have to do that," I said softly. "I will do whatever I have to do," Braden said, turning his back on me, dismissing me as a threat. "We are leaving. If you don't find a buyer for that dirt patch by Friday, Harlan, I am putting Emily on the street. I swear it." It was only then, after the physical threat, after the destruction of my property, that I played my ace. I waited until his hand was on the doorknob before I mentioned the wealthy friend. I needed them to think they had bullied me into it. I needed them to think their violence had worked. I needed them to walk into that party feeling invincible so their fall would be absolute. It was 1 o'clock on Monday afternoon when the first domino fell. I was sitting in my armchair in the darkened living room of my apartment, staring at the rain streaking against the window pane. My phone sat on the small side table next to a cup of cold tea. When it finally buzzed, the sound was like a gunshot in the silence. It was Frank. The text was short and brutal. "The asset purchase agreement is signed. We own the paper. $12 million in senior secured debt from 3 regional banks. The transfer is complete." I picked up the phone. I didn't text back. I dialed. Frank answered immediately, his background quiet, meaning he was likely in his private office, the war room where he dismantled companies for breakfast. "It is done then?" I asked. "It is done," Sir Frank replied. "Your shell company North Star Holdings is now the primary creditor for the Sterling Group. We hold the mortgage on their commercial properties, the liens on their equipment, and the personal guarantees Richard signed to secure the operational lines of credit." "Good," I said, leaning back. My heart rate didn't even spike. This was business. This was just mechanics. "Now execute the acceleration clause." Frank hesitated for a beat. "Sir, if we accelerate now, we are demanding full repayment of the principal immediately. They don't have the cash. This will trigger a default event across all their other liabilities. It is called a cross default. It will lock them out of everything." "I know what it is, Frank," I said, my voice steady. "I wrote the clause into my own contracts 40 years ago. Do it. Declare them in default. Flag the accounts for suspicious activity. I want their liquidity to freeze instantly. I want every card in their wallet to turn into a piece of useless plastic." "Understood. Initiating the freeze now." I hung up. I closed my eyes and visualized what was happening 5 miles away. I knew Richard Sterling's schedule because men like him are creatures of habit and vanity. On Mondays, he had lunch at the Capitol Grill. It was the most expensive steakhouse in the city, the kind of place where deals were made over martinis and wedge salads. He would be there right now, probably with a potential investor or a junior partner trying to project an image of unshakable wealth. I imagined the scene. Richard laughing too loud, his napkin tucked into his collar, ordering a bottle of wine he couldn't afford. He would be feeling confident, thinking he had bullied Emily into submission, thinking the money was coming. Then the check would arrive. At 2:15, my phone buzzed again. It wasn't Frank this time. It was a notification from the bank monitoring software Frank had installed to track the Sterling accounts. Alert transaction declined. Merchant, the Capitol Grill. Amount $412. I smiled. It had begun. I could see it in my mind's eye. The waiter returning to the table holding the black folder with an apologetic grimace. He would lean in whispering so the other diners wouldn't hear. "I am sorry, Mr. Sterling. The card was declined." Richard would flush red. He would bluster. He would say it was a mistake, a banking error. He would pull out another card. The platinum one. The one he used to buy his suits. Alert transaction declined. Merchant, the Capitol Grill. Then the corporate card. The one backed by the business assets I now owned. Alert transaction declined. 3 strikes. The humiliation would be absolute. He would have to call Braden or dig for cash or worse, leave his guest to pay the bill. For a narcissist like Richard, that wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a mortal wound. By 3 o'clock, the panic would have shifted from the restaurant to the mansion. I imagined Richard speeding home, his hands shaking on the steering wheel of his leased Mercedes. He would be calling the bank, screaming at some low-level customer service representative who couldn't tell him anything because the accounts had been flagged by the fraud department of a holding company that didn't technically exist on public records. I sat there in my quiet apartment and waited. I knew the rhythm of financial collapse. First comes the confusion, then the anger, then the terror. At 4 o'clock, the phones would start ringing. When you default on a primary loan, it triggers a chain reaction. The automated systems at the leasing companies for their cars would get a ping. The insurance companies would get a notification. The credit monitoring agencies would light up like a Christmas tree. I checked the monitor Frank had set up for me on my tablet. It showed the communication logs for the Sterling Group's office lines. The activity bars were spiking red. Incoming call. Incoming call. Incoming call. They were getting hit from all sides, vendors they hadn't paid in months, the power company, the private club where they held their memberships. Everyone smells blood in the water at the same time. I pictured Braden in that big hollow house. He would be pacing the marble floors, his expensive shoes clicking nervously. He would be trying to log into the online banking portal. Access denied. Account frozen. Please contact your branch administrator. He would try the Cayman accounts, the shadow money, but he couldn't move it. Even if he had access, those transfers take time, and right now he didn't have time. He had a lifestyle that burned $20,000 a month just to keep the lights on, and suddenly he couldn't buy a gallon of milk. At 5 o'clock, Frank called me back. The first phase is complete, Sir Frank said. We have successfully blocked all outgoing wire transfers. We have placed liens on the personal vehicles. And the sheriff's department has been notified of the intent to repossess the commercial assets within 48 hours. How are they reacting, I asked. They are frantic. Richard has called the bank president 12 times in the last hour. He is threatening to sue. He is threatening to call the governor. He is sounding unhinged. Good, I said. And the shadow lenders, the ones in Miami. That is the interesting part, Frank said. Since we froze the assets, the automatic interest payment that was scheduled to go out to the shell company today, it bounced. I let out a low breath. That was the match in the powder keg. They missed a payment to the cartel, I said. Yes, sir. And people like that do not care about banking errors. They see a bounced payment as a sign of disrespect. Richard is going to be getting a very different kind of phone call very soon. This was dangerous. I knew that. By squeezing Richard, I was putting him in the crosshairs of violent men. But I also knew that Richard was a coward. When the sharks started circling, he wouldn't stand and fight. He would run to the only person he thought he could still manipulate. He would run to me. Keep the pressure on Frank, I said. Don't let them breathe. I want them to feel the weight of every single dollar they stole. I want them to realize that their entire life is a rental and the lease has just expired. I hung up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still dark and threatening. Below on the street, life went on. People were coming home from work worrying about dinner, worrying about bills. They had no idea that a financial execution was taking place just a few miles away. I thought about Emily. She was probably at the house right now watching her husband and father-in-law unravel. She would be scared. She wouldn't understand why the credit cards weren't working, why the phones wouldn't stop ringing. Braden would be spinning lies telling her it was a glitch, a temporary setback, a conspiracy against them. But the fear in his eyes would be real, and she would see it. I needed them to break. I needed them to be so desperate, so stripped of their pride that they would show their true faces. I needed them to come to me not as arrogant masters of the universe, but as beggars. And they would come. I knew it as surely as I knew the sun would rise. They had no liquidity. They had no credit. They had enemies closing in from the south. The only asset they had left was a piece of land in the country that belonged to a senile old man who didn't know the value of $1. Or so they thought. I went to the kitchen and opened a can of soup for dinner. I ate it standing up, leaning against the counter. It was simple food, honest food. It tasted better than any steak Richard Sterling had ever eaten on credit. The trap was sprung. The cage was locked. Now all I had to do was wait for the rats to realize there was no way out except through me. The door clicked shut and the silence rushed back into the apartment, heavy and thick. I stood there for a moment, listening to the fading echo of Braden's laughter in the stairwell. "Can you believe that old fool?" The words hung in the air like smoke. I walked to the window and peered through the blinds. Down in the parking lot, Richard was leaning against his Mercedes, wiping sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. Braden was pacing, talking animatedly, with his hands probably already spending the money they thought they were about to get. They looked like vultures who had just spotted a fresh carcass. They had no idea the carcass was baited with poison. I turned away from the window and went to the closet. I pushed aside the flannel shirts and the worn denim jackets until I reached the back. There, inside a garment bag that hadn't been opened in 3 years, hung my tuxedo. It was a bespoke piece cut by a tailor in London who dressed royalty. I ran my hand over the fabric. It was still perfect. I pulled out my satellite phone and dialed Frank. They took the bait, I said. My voice was no longer the wavering whisper of a scared old man. It was granite. Excellent, Sir Frank replied instantly. The Grand Plaza is secured. I bought out the Grand Ballroom for tomorrow night. The staff has been briefed. The security detail is in place. Good. Now, Frank, I want you to fill that room. Fill it, sir. I want an audience. I want every creditor they have stiffed in the last 5 years. Call the vendors, the caterers, the florists, the contractors. They never paid. Tell them the Sterling Group is hosting a settlement gala. Tell them checks will be cut at the door. They will come running. I understand. You want witnesses. I want a jury. I corrected him. And Frank, send a special invitation to Tiffany. The mistress? Yes. Tell her a modeling agency scout will be there looking for new talent. Flatter her vanity. Make sure she attends. And make sure she feels entitled to be there. Consider it done. And the Miami debt. Sir, the $5 million. The transfer cleared 10 minutes ago, I said. I own the note. I am the shadow lender now. Technically, I own the air Richard Sterling is breathing right now. I could hear the smile in Frank's voice. It is going to be quite a show, Harlan. It is not a show, Frank. It is a reckoning. Get the helicopter ready. The chairman is coming out of retirement. I hung up the phone and sat in my armchair. I closed my eyes and visualized the chessboard. Richard and Braden were moving their pieces, blindly driven by greed and fear. They thought they were walking into a salvation meeting. They thought they were going to charm a wealthy investor and spin their web of lies one more time. They didn't know that the wealthy investor was the man they had mocked for driving a Ford. They didn't know that the venue belonged to a holding company I founded in 1985. They didn't know that the rich friend was just a mirror reflecting their own avarice back at them. I thought about Emily. She was the only variable that worried me. She would be there caught in the crossfire. Seeing her husband for what he truly was would destroy her. It would break her heart. But a broken heart can heal. A life lived in slavery to a monster. That is a fate worse than death. I had to break her heart to save her life. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I poured the rest of the cold coffee down the sink. I wouldn't need caffeine to stay awake tonight. Adrenaline would do just fine. I picked up a pen and a notepad. I started drafting my speech. I didn't need a teleprompter. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I had been writing this speech in my head since the moment that wine hit my daughter's face. Ladies and gentlemen, I wrote, welcome to the harvest. Tomorrow night the masquerade would end. Tomorrow night the flannel shirt would come off and the armor would go on. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. The old man was gone. The wolf of Southern logistics was back, and he was hungry. I stood in the center of my small living room feeling the energy shift. It was no longer a place of hiding. It was a command center. I picked up the satellite phone and dialed Frank Kowalski again. The line connected instantly. Frank, I said, my voice steady and cold. It is time to set the stage. I want the Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom booked for tomorrow night. The Grand Plaza, sir. That is your crown jewel. Exactly. It is the only venue in the city ostentatious enough to make Richard Sterling believe he has finally ascended to the heavens. He thinks he is walking into a coronation. I want him to feel the luxury. I want him to smell the money he thinks he is about to steal. Spare no expense, Frank. Champagne fountains, live orchestra. Ice sculptures. Make it look like the Great Gatsby threw a party for the devil. Understood, sir. And the guest list. This is the most important part, Frank. I don't want friends. I want witnesses. I want you to invite every single person Richard Sterling has swindled in the last decade. Call the contractors who built his phantom developments and never got paid. Call the suppliers who are holding his bad checks. Call the bank managers who are losing their jobs because of his defaults. Tell them it is a settlement gala. Tell them the new investor is cutting checks at the door. That will pack the room, sir. It will be a powder keg. That is the point. And Frank, there is one more invitation, a very specific one. I want you to reach out to the modeling agency that represents Tiffany, Braden's mistress. The same. Tell them a wealthy benefactor is looking for a face for his new luxury brand. Offer her triple her usual rate to attend as a brand ambassador. Tell her she needs to look stunning. Tell her the man making the hiring decision will be there, and his name is Braden Sterling's silent partner. That is diabolical, sir. Braden won't know she is coming. He won't have a clue. He thinks he can keep his worlds separate. He thinks he can have the wife at home and the mistress in the penthouse. Tomorrow night, those worlds are going to collide, and I want a front row seat when the universe collapses on top of him. I hung up and walked to the closet. I pushed aside the tuxedo I had looked at earlier. No, not yet. If I showed up in a tuxedo too early, they would suspect something. They needed to see the victim. They needed to see the mark. I pulled out my most worn-out pair of work trousers, the ones with the oil stain on the thigh from when I fixed the transmission on the Ford. I found a flannel shirt that was fraying at the collar. I put on my old boots, the ones with the scuffed leather toes. I looked in the mirror. I didn't see a billionaire. I saw a tired, defeated old man who was ready to sell his family land for pennies on the dollar. It was the perfect disguise. I reached into the pocket of the flannel shirt and pulled out a small silver USB drive. It was light, cold metal. It didn't look like much, but inside that drive was the forensic accounting report Frank had compiled. Every wire transfer to the Cayman Islands, every forged signature, every bounced check. It was the nail in Richard's coffin and the key to my daughter's freedom. I slipped it back into my pocket right next to my heart. Now, I had one last call to make. The hardest one. I dialed Emily's number. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with anxiety. "Dad, did they come see you? Braden said they were going to talk to you." "They did, honey," I said, keeping my voice calm. "They made me an offer. They want me to sell the farm." "Oh, Dad, you shouldn't have to do that. That land means everything to you. It is just dirt, Emily." "You are what matters." I told them I might know someone, a friend from the old days who made it big. I told them he might be willing to invest. Really? Who? Just an old acquaintance. He is hosting a party tomorrow night at the Grand Plaza. I convinced Richard and Braden to come. I told them I could get them an introduction. The Grand Plaza. That is incredibly fancy, Dad. Are you sure? I am sure. But Emily, I need you to do something for me. I need you to come too. I don't know, Dad. Braden is so angry. He said I humiliated him at the bank. He said I am not allowed to leave the house until I sign the papers. He will let you come to this, I said. He thinks there is money on the table. He will want you there to look like the supportive trophy wife. He will want to show off. But listen to me closely, Emily. This is vital. I am listening. When you come tomorrow night, I want you to wear the white dress, the one Richard ruined. Dad, I can't. It is stained. It looks terrible. Clean it as best you can, but wear it. It is a symbol, Emily. It reminds them of what they did, and it reminds you of who they are. And when you are there, do not say a word. Do not sign anything. Do not defend them. Do not apologize for them. Just watch. Watch what, Dad? Watch the truth come out. I promise you, honey, by the time the dessert is served, you will never have to be afraid of them again. Just trust me one last time. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear her breathing shaky and scared. But underneath the fear, I heard the steel I knew was there, the steel she got from her mother. Okay, Dad, I trust you. I will be there. I hung up the phone and felt a wave of exhaustion hit me. It was the heavy, soul-deep tiredness of a man who has to hurt the person he loves most to save her. I was sending her into the lion's den one last time. I was setting up a stage where her husband would be destroyed in front of her eyes. It was cruel. It was necessary. I sat down on the edge of my bed in the dark apartment. The streetlights from outside cast long shadows across the floor. Tomorrow night the lights would be bright. Tomorrow night there would be no shadows left to hide in. Richard Sterling wanted a savior. Braden Sterling wanted a payday. I was going to give them exactly what they deserved. I patted the pocket with the USB drive one more time. The weapon was loaded. The trap was set. The invitation was sent. All that was left to do was wait for the curtain to rise. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer to Martha. Forgive me for what I am about to do, but I am going to bring the house down. The Grand Plaza Ballroom was not merely a room, it was a statement of absolute power. The ceiling soared 30 feet high, adorned with crystal chandeliers that cascaded like frozen waterfalls, casting a prism of light over the polished marble floors. The air smelled of expensive perfume, chilled champagne, and the distinct metallic tang of money. I stood in the shadow of a massive Doric column holding a glass of sparkling water that I had no intention of drinking. I was wearing my stained work trousers, the ones with the fraying hem, and a flannel shirt that had seen better days in the 90s. My boots were scuffed and muddy, a stark contrast to the patent leather shoes gliding across the floor around me. To the uniformed servers who moved like ghosts with silver trays, I was invisible, a piece of debris that had somehow blown in from the service alley. But I was not debris. I was the architect of this entire evening. I checked my watch. It was 8 o'clock sharp. The heavy double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. Richard and Braden Sterling walked in, and for a moment they looked exactly like what they pretended to be, masters of the universe. Richard wore a tuxedo that fit him a little too tightly around the waist, the satin lapels catching the light. He walked with his chest puffed out a strut that was meant to convey dominance but only betrayed his deep insecurity. Braden was a carbon copy of his father, slick and shiny with hair that had been sculpted into submission. He wore a smile that looked painted on a mask of confidence that did not quite reach his eyes. And between them, walking like a prisoner to the gallows, was Emily. My heart clenched in my chest. She was wearing the white dress just as I had asked. The stain from the red wine was still there, a dark, jagged scar running down the fabric like an old wound. She had tried to clean it, but some things do not wash out. She kept her head down, her shoulders hunched inward as if she were trying to make herself smaller. She looked terrified. She looked ashamed. She looked like she wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow her whole. Seeing her like that fueled the fire in my gut, turning it from a simmer to a roaring blaze. They spotted me almost immediately. It is hard to miss a man in work clothes at a black tie gala. Braden nudged Richard and pointed toward my corner. I saw the look on their faces. It wasn't concern. It wasn't embarrassment. It was amusement. They thought I was the court jester come to entertain the kings. They walked over to me trailing a cloud of musk and arrogance. Richard's voice was loud, booming across the quiet murmur of the nearby guests. "Well, look who decided to show up. I didn't know they let the help in the front door." He laughed, a short barking sound that grated on my nerves. He turned to a group of men standing nearby. I recognized them. They were wealthy contractors, men I had done business with for 30 years. Men who knew exactly who I was and who respected the code of silence I had asked for. "Gentlemen," Richard announced, gesturing at me with a manicured hand. "This is my daughter-in-law's father. Poor old Harlan. We try to take care of him, but he insists on playing in the dirt. He is basically our gardener. A charity case really, but family is family, right?" The contractors didn't laugh. They looked at Richard with eyes like flint. They held their drinks steady, their expressions unreadable. They knew I had signed the checks that built their companies. They knew I could buy and sell Richard Sterling 10 times over before breakfast. But they stayed silent because they knew the game. They were waiting for the signal. Braden stepped forward, shaking his head with mock pity. "You look terrible, Harlan. Did you sleep under a bridge last night? You are embarrassing, Emily. Look at her. She is mortified." I looked at my daughter. She was trembling. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my bicep with desperate strength. "Dad, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Let's go. This is a mistake. They are laughing at us. Everyone is staring. I can't do this. I can't stand here and let them humiliate you like this." I put my rough hand over hers. I felt the fine bones of her hand shaking beneath my skin. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I planted my feet on the ground I owned. "Stay, Emily," I said. My voice was low, a rumble in my chest that only she could hear. "You promised me. The play hasn't even started yet. You don't walk out during the overture." "But Dad, look at them," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "They are winning. They always win. Nobody wins until the game is over," I said. "Just watch." Richard and Braden lost interest in taunting me. They had bigger prey to hunt. They needed money, and they needed it tonight. I watched them move away from us, heading toward the center of the room like sharks scenting blood. Richard zeroed in on Arthur Penhaligon, the owner of the largest concrete supply firm in the state. Arthur was a man who hated unpaid invoices more than he hated taxes. I knew for a fact that Richard owed him $200,000 for a foundation that was never poured. I watched the interaction unfold like a slow-motion car crash. Richard clapped Arthur on the shoulder, laughing too loud, his smile stretching wide. Arthur didn't smile back. He didn't even turn his body. He just stared at Richard's hand on his shoulder until Richard slowly, awkwardly pulled it away. I saw Richard's lips move fast, manic pitching the deal, talking about the great opportunity, about the millions to be made. Arthur shook his head once sharply. He said something short, something brutal. Then he turned his back on Richard, completely engaging in conversation with the woman next to him. It was a dismissal so absolute it was almost physical. Richard stood there for a moment, blinking, his smile faltering. He looked confused. He adjusted his tie and moved to the next group. Braden was having no better luck. He tried to charm the vice president of the regional bank, a woman named Sarah who had denied his credit line extension just that morning. He approached her with his signature grin, opening his arms for a hug. Sarah took a step back. She held up a hand, palm out, stopping him in his tracks. She spoke a few words, her face icy and professional, then walked away, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the dance floor. They were radioactive. They were walking through a crowd of people who knew they were dead men walking. The smell of failure was on them, and in high society, failure is contagious. No one wanted to be seen talking to the Sterlings. No one wanted to be associated with the sinking ship. I watched the sweat start to break out on Richard's forehead again. The confident strut was turning into a frantic pacing. He loosened his bow tie. He grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing tray and downed it in one gulp. They couldn't understand it. They were wearing the right clothes. They were in the right room. They were using the right buzzwords. Why wasn't the magic working? They didn't realize that the man in the flannel shirt standing in the corner had already poisoned the well. They didn't realize that every person in this room was here to watch the execution, not to save the condemned. Emily watched them too. Her grip on my arm loosened slightly. She saw the rejection. She saw the way the room bent away from her husband. "Dad," she whispered. "What is happening? Why is no one talking to them?" "Because money talks, Emily," I said. "But debt screams. And right now they are screaming louder than anyone else in the room." Richard was looking around wildly now. He was looking for the host. He was looking for the wealthy friend I had promised. He scanned the room, his eyes darting past me, looking for someone in a tuxedo, someone who looked like a savior. He didn't see him. He only saw faces that were closed and cold. Braden came up to his father. I could see them arguing in hushed tones. Braden pointed at his watch. Richard wiped his face with a napkin, his movements jerky and agitated. They were running out of time. They were running out of options. And then the atmosphere in the room shifted again. A hush fell over the crowd near the entrance. I looked over. She had arrived. Tiffany walked into the ballroom looking like a vision. She was wearing a shimmering gold dress that clung to every curve, a dress that was designed to be looked at. Her hair was a cascade of perfect blonde waves. She held her head high, looking around with the entitlement of a woman who had been told she was the guest of honor. Braden was across the room, his back to the door, arguing with a waiter about a drink. He didn't see her. He didn't see the final nail in his coffin walking toward him in 6-inch heels. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. The stage was set. The players were in position. The trap was about to snap shut. I turned to Emily. "Do you see that woman over there?" I asked, pointing to Tiffany. Emily squinted. "The woman in gold." "Yes." "Who is she?" I didn't answer. I just watched Braden turn around. I watched the color drain from his face as he locked eyes with his mistress across the crowded room. I watched his mouth open in a silent, wordless horror. "Just watch," I told my daughter. "The show is about to get very interesting." Braden moved across the ballroom floor with a speed born of pure panic. He intercepted Tiffany halfway between the entrance and the bar. He did not hug her. He did not kiss her cheek. He grabbed her upper arm with a grip that I knew from experience would leave a bruise. It was the same way he grabbed my daughter. He steered her forcefully toward the heavy velvet curtains that separated the main ballroom from the small private alcove used for telephone calls and hushed negotiations. He thought he was being discreet. He thought the noise of the orchestra and the chatter of the crowd masked his movements. He did not know that 3 hours ago I had taped a high-fidelity listening device to the underside of the marble side table in that exact alcove. I touched Emily's shoulder gently. "Come with me," I said. She looked at me, her eyes still wet with tears of humiliation. "Dad, I just want to go home. Please." "Not yet," I said. My voice was hard, not with anger at her, but with the necessity of what had to be done. There is one more thing you need to hear. Just one. Then we can go. I guided her to a quiet spot behind a large decorative fern near the catering station. It was close enough to see the curtains of the alcove, but far enough to remain unseen. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black receiver with a single earbud. I handed it to her. "Put this in your ear," I instructed. "What is this, Dad?" "The truth, Emily. The unvarnished, unfiltered truth. Just listen." She hesitated, her hand trembling as she took the device. She placed the earbud in her ear. I saw the moment the connection clicked. Her eyes widened. She looked at me in confusion, then she looked toward the velvet curtains where her husband had disappeared with the woman in gold. I could not hear the audio, but I knew exactly what was being said. I had rehearsed the scenario in my head 1,000 times. I watched my daughter's face. I watched the transformation happen in real time. At first there was confusion, then shock. She gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth. Inside the alcove, Braden was hissing at Tiffany. "Why are you here? Who sent you? You are going to ruin everything." Tiffany was confused, defensive. "I was invited, Braden. A scout told me I could get a contract. Let go of my arm, you are hurting me. You are going to leave right now," Braden growled. "My wife is here, my father is here. If they see us together, the deal blows up." Your wife, Tiffany, laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. "You mean the boring schoolteacher? You said you were leaving her months ago. You said she was just a placeholder until the trust fund cleared." "I am leaving her." Braden's voice rose in pitch, desperate and venomous. "I just need a few more days. She is a cow, Tiffany. She is pathetic. You think I want to be with her? She is old, and she dresses like a librarian, and I can barely stand to touch her. But she is sitting on $2 million of equity. Once I get her to sign that loan, I will have the cash. Then I will kick her to the curb. I will throw her out so fast she won't know what hit her." Emily stood frozen. The tears that had been flowing all evening stopped. They didn't just dry up. They evaporated in the heat of a sudden white-hot rage. "She is nothing to me," Braden continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "She is just a bank account with a pulse. I have to play the loving husband for 48 more hours. I have to tolerate her whining and her embarrassing father. But once that money hits the account, I am filing for divorce. And I am taking everything. She will be lucky if I leave her with a car to sleep in." I watched Emily's face change. The sadness vanished. The fear vanished. The woman who stood before me was no longer the victim who had been cowed by a wine glass at Thanksgiving. She was the daughter of Harlan Ford. She was the blood of a man who built an empire from dust. Her jaw set, her spine straightened, her eyes, which had been soft and pleading, turned into flint. She pulled the earbud out of her ear and handed it back to me. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She turned and saw a waiter passing by with a tray of drinks. She reached out and took a glass. It wasn't champagne. It was a large goblet of heavy, dark red Cabernet, the same vintage Richard had used to humiliate her. She looked at the glass. Then she looked at me. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "Go get him, honey," I whispered. Emily walked across the ballroom. She didn't hunch her shoulders anymore. She didn't look at the floor. She walked with a stride that cut through the crowd like an icebreaker. People stepped out of her way, sensing the energy radiating off her. She headed straight for the velvet curtains. I followed a few paces behind, ready to intervene if Braden got violent, but I didn't think I would need to. Emily reached the alcove and ripped the curtain back. Braden and Tiffany jumped apart. Braden looked terrified, his face pale and sweating. Tiffany looked annoyed, smoothing her gold dress. Braden stammered, raising his hands in a pathetic defensive gesture. "Babe, it is not what it looks like. This is a business associate. We were just discussing—" Emily didn't let him finish. She didn't scream. She didn't ask for an explanation. She stepped forward, invading his space, forcing him to back up until he hit the wall. "You are right, Braden," she said, her voice calm and deadly loud enough to carry over the sudden silence of the nearby guests. "It is business, and the business is closed. You said I was boring, Braden. You said I was a placeholder. You said I was a bank account with a pulse." Braden's eyes darted around, seeking an escape. "Emily, wait. No, you wait. You threw wine at me because you thought I was weak. You thought I would just sit there and take it because I loved you. But I don't love you, Braden. I love the man I thought you were, but that man doesn't exist." She raised the glass. Braden flinched, covering his face with his hands like a coward. "This is for the disrespect," she said. She threw the wine. It wasn't a frantic splash, it was a deliberate, calculated arc. The dark red liquid hit Braden square in the chest, soaking his white tuxedo shirt, splashing up onto his neck and face. It dripped onto Tiffany's gold dress, staining it purple. Tiffany shrieked, jumping back. Braden stood there gasping, wiping wine from his eyes. His expensive suit ruined his dignity, shattered. The entire ballroom had gone silent. Every eye was on them. The contractors, the bankers, the suppliers, they all watched as the facade of the Sterling family finally dissolved. Emily placed the empty glass on a nearby table with a delicate clink. She looked at Braden shivering and dripping wine, and she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just burned the bridge and enjoyed the light of the fire. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for showing me exactly who you are. Now I know how to respect myself." She turned on her heel and walked away. She didn't look back. She walked toward me, her head held high, the wine stain on her own dress, now wearing it like a badge of honor in a war she had just won. Braden sputtered, wiping his face. "You crazy. You are crazy. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. You think you can embarrass me. You are nothing, you little witch," Richard roared. The sound tore through the stunned silence of the ballroom like a physical blow. He didn't care about the guests anymore. He didn't care about the facade of the respectable businessman. He only saw the red wine dripping from his son's face and the woman who had dared to stand up to them. The mask had fallen off completely, revealing the violent bully underneath. He lunged toward Emily, his face purple with a vein throbbing dangerously in his temple. He raised his hand. It was a backhand motion, heavy and cruel, meant to punish a disobedient child, meant to knock her to the floor. Emily flinched, bracing herself for the impact she had been conditioned to expect. But the blow never landed. I stepped in. I moved with a speed that surprised even me, fueled by a lifetime of protecting what was mine. I didn't just block him. I caught his wrist in midair. My grip was iron-forged from decades of throwing chains over cargo loads. I squeezed. I felt his radius and ulna grind together under my fingers. Richard gasped, his eyes bulging. He tried to pull away, but he was trapped. He looked at me, and for the first time he didn't see a gardener. He saw a wall. "Don't you ever raise a hand to her," I said. My voice was a low growl that vibrated in the air between us. "Not today, not ever." I shoved him back. He stumbled, losing his balance on the polished marble, nearly tripping over his own expensive shoes. He caught himself on a high-top table, knocking over a vase of white roses. Water and petals spilled across the floor, mixing with the wine. It was chaos. It was messy. It was perfect. Richard straightened his jacket, his chest heaving. He looked around the room, desperate to regain control, desperate to turn the narrative back in his favor. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Security!" he screamed again, his voice cracking. "Get this trash out of here. This man is a liar. He promised us an investor. He promised us a savior." He turned to the crowd of contractors and bankers, spreading his arms wide in a plea for validation. He told us he knew a billionaire. He told us he could save our deals. "Look at him. He is a fraud. He dragged us here to humiliate us. Where is your rich friend, Harlan? Where is this phantom investor? He doesn't exist. You are nothing but a sad, lonely old man playing make-believe." I stood calmly in the center of the storm. I let him scream. I let him empty his lungs. I let everyone in the room see exactly how unhinged Richard Sterling truly was. Then I raised my right hand high above my head. I snapped my fingers once. The sound was sharp like a pistol crack. The reaction was instantaneous. The house lights, which had been dimmed for ambiance, cut out completely, plunging the room into a heavy twilight. The hum of the conversation died. The air conditioning seemed to stop. Then a single beam of light cut through the darkness. It didn't search the room. It fell directly on me. It was blindingly white, illuminating the tuxedo I wore beneath the open flannel shirt. From the shadows of the stage, a man walked forward. It was Marcus, the general manager of the Grand Plaza. I had hired Marcus 20 years ago when he was a bellhop. He was loyal, efficient, and knew exactly how to play his part. He walked to the microphone stand, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He adjusted the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice smooth and commanding, booming through the surround sound system, "it is my distinct privilege to correct a misunderstanding." Richard froze. Braden, who was still wiping wine from his eyes, looked up. Mr. Sterling Marcus continued, looking directly at Richard. You asked for the investor. You asked for the man who holds the keys to this city. You asked for the owner of the venue you are currently standing in. Marcus gestured toward me with a sweeping bow. Please rise and show respect for the chairman of the board, the founder of Ford Logistics, the owner of North Star Holdings, Mr. Harlan Ford. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy. It was the sound of 300 people holding their breath at the same time. I saw Richard's jaw literally drop. His eyes darted from Marcus to me, trying to reconcile the image of the truck driver with the name he had just heard. Ford Logistics was a titan. It was the company that moved the steel for his buildings, the lumber for his houses. It was a name he feared, a name he respected, a name he thought belonged to a ghost. Braden looked like he had been shot. His face went from red to a sickly shade of gray. He looked at his wife, then at me, and the realization hit him like a physical blow. The money, the house, the trust fund, it all came from me. I walked toward the stage. I didn't shuffle. I strode. I tossed the flannel shirt onto the floor, leaving it there like a discarded skin. I adjusted my cufflinks. They were gold engraved with the Ford family crest. I climbed the stairs to the stage. Marcus stepped aside, bowing his head. I took the microphone. It felt cold and heavy in my hand, a familiar weight. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the contractors nodding slowly, smiling now that the game was revealed. I saw the bankers looking at their phones, realizing who had bought the debt. I looked down at Richard and Braden. They stood alone in the center of the spotlight, exposed and small. "Hello, Richard," I said. My voice filled the room, calm and amplified. "I believe you were looking for capital." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver USB drive. I held it up so the light caught it. "You asked for a savior?" I continued. "But you didn't check the name on the door. You spent years mocking the man who paid for your dinner. You spent years belittling the hand that fed you. You thought because I drove a Ford and wore denim that I was beneath you." I took a step closer to the edge of the stage, looking down at them like a judge from the bench. "You forgot the first rule of business, Richard. Never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book owns the library." I motioned to the screen behind me. A projector hummed to life. The spreadsheet Frank had compiled appeared on the massive wall behind the stage. It was a sea of red numbers. The forensic audit of the Sterling Group. "This is your ledger," I said, pointing at the screen. $12 million in defaulted bank loans. $5 million in high-interest shadow debt owed to a shell company in the Caymans. Richard was shaking his head, mouthing the word no over and over again. "You missed a payment yesterday, Richard," I said. "To the Cayman account. You thought that money was owed to a cartel. You thought you were dealing with criminals." I paused, letting the tension build until it was unbearable. "You were wrong. You weren't borrowing from the cartel. You were borrowing from North Star Holdings. You were borrowing from me." A gasp went through the room. "I bought your debt, Richard. All of it. Every dime you owe to the banks, every dime you owe to the private lenders, it all belongs to me now. I am your primary creditor. I am the chairman of the board of your bankruptcy." I looked at Braden. He was trembling so hard the wine on his shirt was shaking. "And Braden," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that screamed, "you thought you could use my daughter's inheritance to pay for your mistress. You thought you could use my money to abuse my child." I pointed to the back of the room where Tiffany stood watching in shock. "The lease on the penthouse is canceled. The car is repossessed. The credit cards are dead." I looked back at Richard. "You have 24 hours to vacate my commercial properties. You have 48 hours to vacate your personal residence. The assets of the Sterling Group are hereby seized to satisfy the outstanding judgment." I leaned into the microphone, my eyes locking with his. "Richard Sterling, you are out of time. You are out of money. And you are out of luck. I am here to collect. And I am taking everything." The ballroom doors crashed open again, but this time it wasn't for a dramatic entrance of a socialite, it was the heavy boots of federal agents. Frank had timed it perfectly. The forensic audit on the flash drive wasn't just for show, it had been forwarded to the district attorney's office 3 hours ago. Richard tried to run. He actually tried to scramble off the stage, slipping on his expensive Italian leather soles. 2 agents caught him before he hit the floor. The click of handcuffs echoed louder than the applause he had been desperate for all night. I watched as they read him his rights. He was shouting about conspiracies, about his lawyers, but nobody was listening. The contractors he had stiffed were watching with grim satisfaction. The bankers were already on their phones liquidating what was left of his assets. Then there was Braden. He stood alone in the middle of the dance floor. Tiffany had fled the moment the police arrived, disappearing like smoke. Emily was standing next to me, her hand resting on my arm, strong and steady. Braden looked at us. He looked at the ruin of his father being dragged away. He looked at the empty champagne glasses and the spilled wine. Then he did something that made my stomach turn. He fell to his knees. He didn't just kneel, he collapsed, clasping his hands together like a penitent child. "Dad," he sobbed, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the wine stains on his shirt. "Please, you can't let them do this." I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the Ponzi scheme. I was a victim too. You have to help me. We are family. I looked down at him. I remembered the way he had laughed when the wine hit my daughter's face. I remembered the way he had talked about her in that alcove, calling her a placeholder, a bank account with a pulse. I stepped down from the stage and walked until I was standing right in front of him. "I am not your father, Braden," I said, my voice cold enough to freeze the air in his lungs. "And my daughter is not your ATM. You made your choice. You chose the gold over the girl. Now you have neither." He reached out to grab my pant leg. I stepped back. "Frank," I said without looking away from Braden, "have security remove this man from my hotel. He is trespassing." 2 large security guards hoisted Braden up by his armpits. He was wailing now, begging Emily to look at him, begging for a second chance. Emily didn't look away. She watched him being dragged out, her expression calm, almost pitying. "Goodbye, Braden," she whispered. 3 months later, the winter had turned to spring. The frost was gone from the ground, and the air smelled of wet earth and blooming dogwood. I sat on the tailgate of my 1998 Ford F-150 watching the sun rise over the lake. I had my fishing rod in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. I wasn't wearing a tuxedo. I was wearing my favorite flannel shirt, the one with the patch on the elbow. The Sterling Empire was dust. Richard was awaiting trial in a federal detention center, facing 20 years for wire fraud and racketeering. Braden had declared personal bankruptcy. The last I heard, he was working at a car wash on the south side, scrubbing rims on cars he used to lease. Emily had flourished. The divorce was finalized in record time thanks to the mountain of evidence Frank had compiled. She didn't take a dime of alimony. She didn't need it. She had taken over the Ford Family Foundation, turning my old money into new hope. She was building libraries in rural counties, funding scholarships for kids who grew up like me, dirt poor, but full of dreams. She drove her own car now, bought with her own salary. She wore colors again. She laughed often. I reeled in my line, checking the bait. People often ask me why I didn't just buy them out from the beginning. Why I didn't just write a check and make the problem go away. They don't understand. You can't buy respect, you can't buy character, and you certainly can't buy the truth. Money is just a tool. It is a hammer. You can use it to build a house, or you can use it to break a window. Richard and Braden tried to use it as a weapon, but they forgot that a hammer in the hands of a carpenter is a lot more dangerous than a hammer in the hands of a child. I cast the line back out into the water, watching the ripples spread. I am still just Harlan. I still drive this truck. I still change my own oil. But now when I go to sleep at night, I know that the monsters are gone. Not because they vanished, but because we faced them and we won. Sometimes you have to use a golden hammer to smash a glass house just to show everyone that the people inside were throwing stones all along. The lesson here is simple but brutal. Never mistake silence for weakness. There are people in this world who walk quietly, who dress simply, and who drive old trucks. It is easy to dismiss them. It is easy to think they don't matter. But often the quietest person in the room is the one who built the room. Integrity is not about what you show the world, it is about what you do when you have the power to destroy someone and you choose to save your family instead. Greed blinds you. It makes you see people as objects and relationships as transactions. But in the end, when the ledger is balanced, the only currency that holds its value is how you treated the people who loved you when you had nothing. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that the good guys still win sometimes. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about life resilience and the power of standing your ground. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who only saw the surface? I read every single one. Until next time, keep your head up and your powder dry.